Good afternoon. The first item of business this afternoon is portfolio questions. The portfolio is climate action and energy and transport. And I call it question number 1, George Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what the interaction has been with Strathclyde Partnership for Transport regarding the Strathclyde Regional Bus Strategy.
Minister Jim Fairley.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I very much welcome the significant achievement by Strathclyde Partnership for Transport in the development and the publication of the Strathclyde Regional Bus Strategy. It provides a strong platform for their consideration of the new powers that were introduced by the Transport Scotland Act of 2019. I last met with them in March when they updated me on their consultation and the strategy. At that time, my officials have been in regular contact with the SPT throughout its development and its publication. And the most recent meeting my officials attended on this topic took place on the 24th of November to discuss SPT's next steps following approval of the strategy.
George Adam.
I thank the Minister for the answer. The Minister will be aware that the bus service in Paisley is primarily provided by the operator McGill's. Now, the management of McGill's may currently be busy with politics at the moment, but my constituents have buses cancelled at the last minute, ongoing price increases from a company that has little interest in our community. This has to change, Minister. Does the Minister agree that SPT's proposals are currently the best way forward for my own constituents?
Minister.
Well, as the member is aware, these are private companies that have the control of these bus routes after the deregulation by Mr Thatcher. But I'm pleased to see that SPT is at an early stage in developing their proposals for improving bus provision in Paisley and for Paisley and the wider Strathclyde area. And as part of the franchising process, SPT will be undertaking early engagement with various stakeholders, including neighbouring local authorities and operators, when they begin developing their plans. I also understand that SPT have already presented to their partnership board a costed programme and a timeline for delivering their franchising proposals.
Thank you. Question 2, Douglas Lumsden.
Presiding Officer, to ask the Scottish Government whether the Cabinet Secretary for Climate Action and Energy will engage with community groups affected by new energy projects, now that she is no longer responsible for energy consent decisions.
Cabinet Secretary Gillian Martin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's essential that communities feel able to engage with our planning and consenting systems. The Scottish Government has recently taken steps to make it easier for communities to participate, but I recognise more needs to be done. That's why I've tasked officials with taking forward plans to establish a forum to hear directly from communities as the strategic plans that will shape the need for future energy infrastructure are developed. Separately, members will also be aware of ongoing work to refresh the good practice principles for community benefits from onshore renewable energy, including our consultation last year, which we published the results of in October. I've asked my officials to organise an opportunity for me to engage directly with community representatives on the policy refresh, and I'll keep Parliament updated on those plans.
Douglas Lumsden.
Presiding Officer, my constituents are at their wits' end. For months, the Government refuses to meet community groups who are seeing their communities trashed by pylons, battery storage and substations, but they're happy enough to meet companies like SSEN. And now we learn the ability to submit comments to the ECU by email has been stripped away. This is a cynical manipulation of the planning process and an attempt to shut down my constituents. It's not making it easier, Cabinet Secretary, by taking that away. So will the Cabinet Secretary commit to allowing constituents to email their comments to the ECU so their voices can be heard?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I'll take that suggestion away. I do want to make it clear, though, that regulations relating to electricity transmission and distribution networks are reserved to the UK Government. That's why I was pleased that we reached an agreement with the UK Government on the Planning and Infrastructure Act. Recently afforded new powers to Scottish Ministers to make regulations to mandate developers to engage with local communities and stakeholders. This has been voluntary up till now, and I think this will make a material change. But I'll take your suggestions away.
Thank you. I've got a number of supplementaries. I'll try to get through as many of them as I can, but they will need to be brief, as will the responses. First, Paul McLennan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's vital we continue to balance the need to deliver net zero with the need to protect our natural environment, tourism and rural communities. Can the Cab Sec say any more about the need to strike this balance and how this will inform the Strategic Spatial Energy Plan?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank Paul McLennan for that question. The Scottish Government jointly commissioned NISO to produce the first SSEP for Great Britain. NISO are engaging with a wide range of groups in the development of the next plan, the next Strategic Spatial Energy Plan, and the preferred pathway option will be consulted on in the next year. I'm keen to hear directly from Scotland's communities about how these plans may affect them and how we can learn from their experiences to ensure that future plans build in effective engagement from the earliest possible stage. The Scottish Government will continue working with NISO and partners on this to ensure that the SSEP aligns with devolved powers and planning mechanisms, but also delivers benefit for Scotland's people and communities and supports the just transition.
Briefly, Sarah Boyack.
Given Berwick Bank has now been approved, what is the Scottish Government doing to work with the developer and local communities to reduce the project's impact on seabirds, to deliver local manufacturing and job opportunities and enable links to community heat networks? I'd be happy to get a written update, but it's practical things the Cabinet Secretary needs to be leading on. Thank you.
Cabinet Secretary.
These are all, as Sarah Boyack mentions, there's a lot of things in there that I will be able to write to her with more detail. But if I could take the issue about the impact on seabirds in particular, we're actually very keen for and indeed I believe the developers engaging with the ENGOs on issues. But more widely, we are able to put together a marine restoration fund and do strategic work along dealing with all the pressures associated that are impacting on seabird populations. And we'll be able to use some of the money that's come from the developments of Berwick Bank and others to fund this project more widely.
Very briefly, Faisal Chowdhury.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Members of the public must now submit their views on major projects through the Energy Consent Unit portrayal. However, last week a constituent said the portrayal crashes when the traffic is high and times out what people are submitting. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary what the Scottish Government is doing to ensure that the malfunction do not recur?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I thank Faisal Chowdhury for bringing this to my attention. That there's obviously, if his constituents are having issues with the mechanisms that are there, I'll take that back to my officials and get them to ensure that the system is robust for the future.
Thank you. And very briefly, Finlay Carson.
Now, given the Energy Consent Unit has removed the email and online routes for objections, leaving postal submissions the only option for communities like Hands Off Your Hills or the Glen Gap Community Group, for example, in the Laird Manor Energy Park, what assurances can the Cabinet Secretary give affected communities that they will still be able to participate meaningfully in the process to ensure local democracy is not undermined by this disgraceful decision?
Briefly, Cabinet Secretary.
We want to make sure that people have the access to be able to put their points of view forward. And obviously, I've indicated that we've done some work with the UK Government in terms of actually affording new powers to ministers to make regulations to mandate developers to engage with local communities. I think it's good. I would like to finish
you've asked the question. Can we listen to the answer?
Yeah.
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I think it's only fair that I be given the chance to answer.
Oh, come on.
Mr. Carson.
Presiding Officer, I'll maybe write to the member. I might actually read it instead of not listening to me.
Question number 3, Jamie Alker-Johnson.
Well, to ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had with communities, developers and other stakeholders regarding wide loads and any increased traffic movements on the A86, A89, A82, A87 linked to the Skye Reinforcement Project in the Glenmore Workers' Camp at Fort Augustus.
Cabinet Secretary Fiona Hislop.
So community engagement for the project is the responsibility of Scottish and Southern Electricity Networks, SSEN, Transport Scotland, Bear Scotland, SSEN and their contractors meet regularly to discuss the Skye Reinforcement Project and its effects on the roads and local community. Any wide or abnormal loads must be approved by Transport Scotland in advance. So far, no applications for abnormal load movements have been submitted for this project.
Jamie Alker-Johnson.
Some of these roads are narrow and in poor condition. They're all heavily used by tourists, with tour buses and camper vans a very common sight. They cut through the heart of communities where school children, older folk and pedestrians often have to walk or cross them. And of course, there are already busy routes for local cars and lorries. But now there is a prospect of a series of large loads operating along the routes with all the delays and potential dangers those risk. Those who live alongside these roads, who use them regularly, are worried. Last month, despite my invitation, the Cabinet Secretary wouldn't agree to come to the Highlands and hear from local communities impacted by these projects. So can I ask her, if they come to Edinburgh, to this Parliament, will she agree to meet my constituents and listen first-hand to their concerns?
Cabinet Secretary.
So in terms of the responsibilities, a planning condition was imposed on the Skye Reinforcement Section 37 consent for a traffic management plan to be produced by SSEN and approved by Highland Council. That's where the responsibilities lie for that. In relation to the local roads and the local impacts, again, Highland Council are responsible for that. In relation to the trunk roads, I understand that there are issues in relation to some of the trunk roads, and of course, in terms of wide and abnormal loads, which the member asked about, that would come to Transport Scotland for consent. We understand there is one that has been applied for, and they will respond in due course to Highland Council's request. From a point about meeting his constituents about local roads and the local impact on the conditions set by the independent Highland Council, I'm not sure how appropriate that would be for me to do that. I get requests all the time to visit lots of communities all over Scotland. You can understand that's not possible. If they were to come here and die of permitted, that might be possible, but clearly quite often I'm not in Edinburgh, I might be elsewhere, because what I can do, I do get out and about across Scotland, but particularly if he wants to follow up in writing about particular concerns, I'll see what Lucas Transport Scotland has to engage more directly and practically.
Thank you very much. I'm going to need shorter responses, Cabinet Secretary. Question 4, David Torrance.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what measures are in place to deliver sustainable transport improvements across Fife, including active travel and public transport upgrades in support of net zero targets.
Cabinet Secretary Fiona Hislop.
So significant Scottish Government investment is supporting a range of measures to deliver sustainable transport improvements across Fife, helping to advance national net zero targets. This includes continued investment in active travel, with over 14 kilometres of new pathways, including the River Parks route project to Leven, the delivery of the Levenmouth rail link and the National Cycle Network Route 76 between Earlsferry and Anstruther. This is complemented by bus infrastructure investment in Mr Torrance's constituency of Kirkcaldy, as well as Dunfermline City Station enhancements, public electric vehicle charging and place-based projects that encourage modal shift. These investments sit alongside wider public transport enhancements to improve connectivity and reduce emissions across the region.
David Torrance.
Scottish Zero Emission Bus funding of £680,000 has supported the introduction of 6 zero-emission electric buses in Kirkcaldy. These vehicles are helping to reduce transport emissions, improve local air quality and support progress towards Scotland's net zero ambitions. Can I ask what assessment the Ministers have made of the role of the ScotZEB Fund in accelerating progress towards Scotland's net zero targets?
Cabinet Secretary.
So the Scottish Zero Emission Bus Challenge Fund has played a significant role in accelerating Scotland's progress towards net zero by supporting the rapid decarbonisation of the bus sector to zero emissions. It's supported the demonstration of new business models, reducing the need for the taxpayer subsidy and the development of charging infrastructure to help vehicle decarbonisation in the future more generally. Through the fund and its predecessor, the Scottish Ultra Low Emission Bus Scheme, the Scottish Government has supported the deployment of around 800 zero emission buses and associated charging infrastructure. And ScotZEB has also leveraged £3.20 for every £1 of public investment. And Scotland currently has more than double the proportion of its public sector bus fleet operating as zero emission compared with England outside London, demonstrating the impact of this investment.
Question 5, Tim Eagle.
To ask the Scottish Government when the Cabinet Secretary for Climate Action and Energy will meet with campaign groups regarding the Murray Flow Park project proposal.
Cabinet Secretary Gillian Martin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As stated in previous responses, the project remains at an early stage, and I recognise that strong public concerns and the importance of meaningful engagement with local communities and the fishing industry by the developer. As part of the standard process, the developer is encouraged to engage with stakeholders and the wider community. And while no marine licence applications have been submitted by the developer, any future application would be subject to the relevant rigorous regulatory processes, including any formal public consultation.
Tim Eagle.
Same answer every time I ask the question, despite widespread public opposition to this plan. Murray Flow is a great example of how to get something the wrong way round. Everyone knows the proposal is not in the right place, or if it's even needed. Yet a distant company asked for money, Scottish Enterprise stepped up without even thinking about if they should talk to local people, fishermen or the council, all because of one report. We don't need to wait for an application after another 1.87 million of public money has been spent. We can stop this now and we can start new talks. So will the Cabinet Secretary, with all she must now know, pull the funding and say to the company to not push forward with an application?
Cabinet Secretary.
So, Tim Eagle will get a similar answer because there has not been an application. And when Scottish Enterprise gives funding or advice to any developer of any project that has no implication for the planning process, Scottish Enterprise does not need planning permission to be in place before it can engage with developers or indeed any companies. It makes its own decisions about when to give funding and for what reasons. And it does that without ministerial direction.
Thank you. Can we make sure that we listen to the questions with a degree of courtesy and indeed the responses, however much we may disagree with it? Point of order, Tim Eagle.
Presiding Officer, I respect the Chair, Presiding Officer, I always do. But it's become normal practice in here now that we ask a question on behalf of our constituents and never get an answer. And I think what you're seeing is some frustration from that because it's the same answer time after time.
I thank you for your point, Mr Eagle. As I've, I think, made clear to the Chamber in the past, reactions to what's being said, I think, are natural. When the sedentary interventions continue thereafter, though, that is where there is a problem. Question number 6, Gordon MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how the draft Scottish Budget 26-27 aims to invest in and deliver for Scotland's transport sector.
Cabinet Secretary Fiona Hislop.
So in 2026-2027, the portfolio will invest nearly £4.3 billion to maintain and enhance Scotland's transport network. This includes a record investment of £2.7 billion in public transport to fund bus and rail services, concessionary travel for more than 2.4 million people, and Lifeline ferry and air services. Our investment will support new ferries, port upgrades and the replacement of ScotRail's intercity fleet. We are piloting a bus fare cap across the majority of the Highlands and Islands, have removed ScotRail peak rail fares for good and intend to remove peak fares for islanders using Northern Isles ferry services. We will invest £1.2 billion to maintain and improve the trunk road network. We will progress major projects such as the A9 and A96 dualling and enhance road safety to reduce injuries and fatalities.
Gordon MacDonald.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Parking at Curryhill Railway Station in my constituency has reached capacity at peak times. What investment is planned for rail park and ride facilities accessible to Pentland's constituents?
Cabinet Secretary.
So I think the capacity issues obviously is evidence of the popularity of rail travel in the member's constituency. I think that the Network Rail own Curryhill Station and it's managed through leasing with ScotRail, and I'm not aware of Network Rail or ScotRail's plans in that area. Obviously, it doesn't feature directly in the Scottish Government's plans, and there's no funding allocation to such. However, the Scottish Government remains open to consideration of business cases submitted by third-party promoters, such as Sestrans, the Regional Transport Partnership, to address identified transport in their area. And of course, that business case would have to be assessed across a number of factors to address any problems that are identified.
Supplementary, Sue Webber.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The proposed budget will see a reduction to the rail infrastructure improvement and rolling stock projects budget by 16.5%. Cabinet Secretary, can you outline how this will impact on the ability to procure new rolling stock and infrastructure improvements, particularly in relation to the procurement of new trains to replace ScotRail's HST fleet?
Through the Chair, Cabinet Secretary.
It will have no impact whatsoever, and indeed, in terms of that reduction, that is because of the previous year's extensive investment, particularly the East Kilbride electrification, obviously with Leavenmouth rail line as well. So in terms of the investment that was in the previous year, that was a particularly high level of investment. As you can imagine, rail is invested over long periods of time, so that in terms of the overall planning for rail, we're on target. And in terms of that investment, remember, there's £4.2 billion in the control period 7 being invested in our rail service, with lots happening, and I'm very pleased to say the procurement is progressing as it should be.
Thank you. And question 7, Murdo Fraser.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on what progress has been made in dealing with the issue of short-formed trains on services between Fife and Edinburgh.
Secretary Fiona Hislop.
So I fully appreciate that the short forming of some trains has been impacting passengers travelling on services between Fife and Edinburgh for some time. The reliability of the ageing fleet serving Fife can affect its availability for services, and ScotRail would usually choose to operate a shorter train instead of cancelling the service altogether. To rectify these issues in the longer term, we are investing in replacing the trains serving Fife and electrification of this line, which will bring significant benefits to the area. In the meantime, ScotRail is undertaking a programme of improvement works on its high-speed trains, which will conclude in May 2026, and these improvements are expected to have a positive impact on the availability of trains serving Fife passengers.
Murdo Fraser.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her response? I have been raising this issue for years, and the situation never gets better. We had a short form running trains just yesterday on the Fife to Edinburgh service. For years, I've been promised it's going to get better, and it never does. I last raised this question on the 16th of January last year, and the Cabinet Secretary's response was more or less word for word what she's just told me. In fact, she said at that point, and I quote, "I absolutely sympathise with the situation, which is not acceptable for passengers." She's right. It's not acceptable for passengers. So can she please tell my constituents in Fife when it's going to get better?
Cabinet Secretary.
So he will acknowledge there have been improvements. I think there was a particular issue around September of last year, and it's variable from month to month. The investment, particularly in engineering works, has improved the experience and the incidents. However, whenever it happens, I know it can cause distress and concern. The reason that you would have had the similar answers is obviously the procurement is taking place, as I've just answered, to plan in terms of future rail services, and indeed the improvements on the high-speed trains currently will make that difference. I have been answering about this May 2026 timeframe for some time. It is closer now. Clearly that's frustration for him, and also I know for Annabel Ewing, who also has consistently raised this issue. So I understand it. I hope I can give you that there is an end in sight and the improvements are coming. But the electrification is the big changer for the Fife services.
All through the chair. I've got a number of supplementaries. I'll try and take all of them, but again, they'll need to be brief. First, David Torrance.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Perhaps the Cabinet Secretary could remind the Chamber just how train services in Fife and between Fife and Edinburgh have been improved thanks to actions and investment of SNP.
Cabinet Secretary.
So clearly the most obvious one is the Leavenmouth rail link. That represented £116 million and connected that service again, and it reopened after decades with new stations at Leven and Cameron Bridge, connecting those with 2 trains an hour. I referred to the electrification. That's a £342 million investment, and it will deliver the electrification programme for Fife. I inspected the Haymarket Dalmeny line works just the other week. That's caused disruption for people, but there will be disruption until such time as it's electrified, and we'll be replacing diesel trains in Fife with battery electric trains that will provide greener and cleaner services and will improve the punctuality and, importantly, reliability of ScotRail services in Fife.
Please, Sarah Boyack.
Would the Cabinet Secretary accept that it's absolutely critical, if we're going to give people a choice to not have to use their cars, that commuting on trains is critical? And will she focus on that issue about timescales? Because it's not just Fife to Edinburgh, it's also Borders Railway to Edinburgh. Key commuting links, you need extra capacity, and we need to make sure that's delivered as soon as we can.
Cabinet Secretary.
So the announcement I've just referred to of that £342 million, we're also electrifying Borders railway line, and that again will provide new trains. And in terms of our integration of track and train, the planning for that allows us to get best value for the public purse, but absolutely improve things in relation to both Borders and Fife. This is an ambitious programme for the railways in Scotland, and I think the electrification that is pushing ahead in Scotland is one of the ways we can tackle net zero, but encourage more people to choose train, as the member has suggested.
And finally, Annabel Ewing.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. I have listened carefully to the Cabinet Secretary's comments this afternoon, and she will know that I have raised this for many, many years. What my constituents want to know is by what date will there be no more short-formed trains on this line? Thank you.
Cabinet Secretary.
So, as I referred to in my answer to Murdo Fraser, I know the member Annabel Ewing has consistently and persistently raised this issue. I did make the point that May 2026 will see an improvement. Her question is specifically when will the end be? And from my own experience in relation to electrification, it is the electrification itself that will help, I think, eliminate the short forming. I am not the operator. So in terms of that specific area, I'll refer to Transport Scotland and ScotRail to confirm what I have said. But in relation to short forming, I know from my experience with the electrification on the Glasgow-Edinburgh line, but it was the electrification that finally removed short forming on that line.
Thank you. That question 8 was not lodged. Therefore, that concludes climate action, energy and transport portfolio questions. There will be a brief pause before we move to the next item to allow front benches to change.